It's the third week of Ratchet Clank Month, and the video I'm providing today is quite different from the usual. In this video, I will be selecting 8 weapons from the franchise that I would most want to have in my Quick Select. Nothing more, nothing less. Normally, I would just make a countdown of my favorite weapons, but since I've already made a countdown for this R&C month, I wanted to do something a little different. A good thing about this idea is that it forces me to not include weapons that are too similar, as that would make the selection redundant. Take for example Rhino or morphing weapons. Some of those definitely occupy my top list, as they have several fun weapons, but if I added most of those, then my weapons lineup along with this video would be very repetitive. I'll have to be more selective instead, which might mean that the 8 weapons I pick aren't necessarily my top 8 weapons, but rather the weapon variety I would prefer having. Also, I'm going to pretend that the weapons I choose can be used in every game. Now that could allow for some interesting new uses. I won't include gadgets, since I fear that would make things too complicated, and some of them are used automatically without selecting them anyway, like the swing shot and gelinator. Neither will I take into account multiple quick select rings, as to keep the video from being too long. So, I hope you'll enjoy watching me design my ideal Ratchet & Clank Quick Select. I'll start off this Quick Select with probably my favorite non-Rhino weapon in the entire series. Even if it's not a Rhino, it's still one of the strongest weapons, as it's an expert crowd clearer, reloads considerably fast, and has a good amount of ammo, especially in its debut game. I'm referring to Megacorp's finest weapon, the Plasma Coil. Okay, the Plasma Coil doesn't exactly show the weapon's true capabilities, but it's still great. The Plasma Storm on the other hand is absolutely incredible. This upgrade not only saps just about every enemy on screen, but many enemies that are off screen aren't safe from its range either. If that wasn't enough, it kills stronger enemies quite easily, so it's not just the weaklings it wipes out. It's such a perfect all-rounder. I also dig its model. It looks very unique, and the sounds it makes are wonderful, especially when it takes out a dozen enemies. This weapon means so much to me that it even overshadows my favorite level in Up Your Arsenal. Every time I go to Planet Koros and Slim Cognito tells me he's selling the Plasma Coil, I drop everything and immediately fly to Aquatos to acquire it, which is quite the feat when Koros' music draws me in so much. I'm not sure whether that version or the original Going Commando one is the best. The Going Commando version ends up with far more ammunition, but its ammo count is a bit of an overkill, as it doesn't need that many, and the Up Your Arsenal version feels better to use, so I guess I prefer having the later iteration. Either way, both are incredible, and I so hope the Plasma Coil / Storm will return in a new R&C someday. That would be amazing. Now let's move over to an iconic weapon from the original, which is much like the Plasma Storm, a great crowd clearer. It basically makes the Porositor redundant, as it functions kind of similarly, but it's just better in almost every way. That weapon is the Tesla Claw. I said this weapon is a great crowd clearer like the Plasma Storm, but that's not the only similarity these weapons share. It also has a claw, albeit a bigger one, making for such an intimidating look. It also saps enemies, but differently enough as to not make this pick redundant, and it's really effective. Its electricity has far reach and automatically latches onto anyone who dares enter its path. It only gets better with the upgrade, that gives the claw a cool thick green laser that's even more powerful, and is highly effective against bosses too. For a game with such clunky movements, at least compared to later R&C games, it's a perfect weapon for dealing with enemies you don't want to aim at, and I think that's a nice convenience to have. There are many morph weapons in R&C, all of which are good, but of varying quality. The morph array is fun and original, but it's less effective than the similar Porositor and Tesla Claw. The Sheepinator in Going Commando is decent, but can't be used while in mid-air, which gives it a major disadvantage. Such is also the case with the Quack Array, but that one's cooler and a lot more efficient, and it actually almost made the list. The Chimpomatic can be used while in the air and is about as good as the Quack Array, but it just barely didn't make it either. The Critter Strike in All for One is actually really good. I mean, it is a morphing weapon after all, but it commits the ultimate sin of limiting its ammo capacity. So, that only leaves the Winterizer, right? Wrong! It also commits the sin of limiting its ammunition, so that's not it either. Then, what morphing weapon does make the cut? Well, it's actually the Sheepinator, but not the Going Commando version, rather the one in the PS4 game. This weapon is super efficient, more so than any other morphing weapon in the series, and you can in fact use it while jumping. Oh, and it has unlimited use, so that's brilliant. It's also just really pleasant to watch as it shoots its colorful beam and gradually turns enemies. It feels good aiming the beam at foes, especially in these Calibur 3 rooms where you use the analog sticks to aim and shoot. I quite like the sheep design too, and the upgraded version turns enemies into goats, so that's pretty cool. Watching them dance is also entertaining, but for that to happen, I'll need a Groovatron. You may be arguing, hey, the Groovatron's not a weapon, and in a way you're right, but it does end by dropping to the floor and exploding, to be fair. It's also a way more effective restraining weapon than the magnet launcher, for instance, which is also a cool weapon, but not cool enough to make the cut. I'll be honest and say that this was the last pick I considered out of these 8, and it was a hard elimination process, ending with the Groovatron winning over the Rift Inducer, but my main reason for including the Groovatron is that I just want to see everyone dance, both old and new enemies alike. It's also, like I said, a brilliant restraining weapon, literally stopping enemies in their tracks, which yeah, does seem like cheating, and it is, but hey, it can be useful if you're in a pinch or just don't want to deal with enemies at any given moment. I suppose the gold Groovatron would be preferable, since it has unlimited ammo, but that's a bit broken if I do say so myself, and it doesn't come with the finishing blow that got introduced in a crack in time. Anyhow, I think I'd appreciate having the Groovatron in my Quick Select forever, as that means I can always boogie to some sick beats whenever I'm bored. Most weapons in R&C are long-ranged ones, but the series also has its fair share of melee weapons, so this is where those come in. Honestly, I'm overall not that fond of melee weapons from the series, as most of them aren't all that effective or fun to use, at least not compared to the best of the best. Sure, the Walloper, Plasma Whip, Shock Ravager, and Blitzer are cool, but none of them are really all that efficient. That being said, there is one melee weapon that stands far above the rest, and that's none other than the legendary Scorpion Flail. This is by far my favorite weapon in Deadlocked, yes, even more so than the Harbinger. What's interesting to note is that this weapon goes against the heavy logstrafe nature of Deadlocked, the game that has my favorite combat in the franchise, mind you, and yet it's my favorite weapon in the game. In fact, it might just be this departure that makes it so refreshing, as it means you're not restricted by the shackles of how the gameplay is usually structured. You just go loose and smash the ground up wherever you go. It's especially cathartic combining it with the charge boots, as the transition from charging into smashing is so seamless. It's better yet if you equip the flail with some modifications, which is a sweet benefit Deadlocked has, and I usually strap the flail with the freeze mod, which slows down the enemies you smash. That won't matter much when the flail can take out most enemies so quickly, but the ice breaking apart makes it so much cooler, so it works. If ranged weapons won't do the talking, then the Scorpion Flail is a great icebreaker. This next pick may seem silly, but I would really want to mess around with a glitch weapon, which isn't necessarily a good weapon, but allows for some fun glitch exploits. There are a few classic examples of these, like the decoy glove and mini turrets, that are used for clipping through walls, and while that's nice and all, I'd rather go with one that gives me more mobility options, and what weapon is better for that than Tools of Destruction's Razor Claws? Not only do they propel you super fast in the air, but you can also climb walls with them, which is dope. Granted, you can't do this without having the thruster pack equipped, but even though I excluded gadgets from this selection, they can still be used. It's especially fun to use these claws combined with the Gelinator, so that you can reach even higher and further places. But of course, that's only possible in specific levels in a specific game. The biggest flaw with this weapon is that its ammo capacity is limited. Sure, it has 50 at most, which is a lot, but it's still not enough to scale certain walls, like ones on Fastoon that I would love to reach the roof of. Even so, it's by far my favorite glitch weapon, and it's a really good melee weapon too. It's fairly strong and becomes even stronger the more you kill without getting hit yourself, although their short range does make it easy to get hit while using them. It might have been redundant for me to add 2 melee weapons, hadn't the Scorpion Flail and Razor Claws been so different, and the glitch aspect of the Razor Claws differentiates them even more. I'm sad that both weapons only appeared in one game, but given that the Razor Claws were actually considered for a crack in time, that makes their one-off appearance even more heartbreaking. This next weapon is also from Tools of Destruction, but unlike the Razor Claws, this one's appeared in other games too. Also unlike the Razor Claws, this one is long-ranged and is known for shooting blades that ricochet off walls. It's basically an enhanced disc blade launcher, which is a good weapon, but that one's quite slow and doesn't feel all that satisfying to use in comparison. As for the chopper, it's really cool but halts your movement unless you're in the air, and gets weak pretty quickly. The buzz blades, however, are amazing, especially in a crack in time, where it not only has a fast rate of fire, but is also fairly powerful. I love the sound this weapon makes, which is produced rapidly, so it's impressive that I don't get tired of it. The movements of the blades are so smooth too, and I like how each successive blade heads in different directions. It's a very nice detail that makes the weapon feel more dynamic. The model itself is very nice, I quite like the orange on it, and the tiny spinning blade sticking halfway out is another great detail. One last detail I find cool is blades sometimes sticking to walls temporarily. It's the cherry on top of this intricate design. Otherwise, it's just a great weapon that works well against all types of enemies, feels satisfying to use, and has loads of ammunition. Lastly, I'll need a powerful weapon that won't ever falter. You might have noticed that I haven't mentioned the rocket launcher type of weapon yet, and while I'm mentioning it now, I won't include one. That's because there are more powerful weapons that compensate for a lack of rocket launchers. That's right, I have to include a super weapon, and as awesome as the Harbinger and the idea of the Zodiac are, it has to be a Rhino weapon. But which one do I choose? Well, I mentioned rocket launchers at the beginning of the segment, and I suppose the original Rhino fits that category the best, as it's basically a beefed up one, but I think the most efficient missile launcher in the whole series has to be the Rhino 2. Is this my favorite Rhino? I'm not sure, but I feel like it's the perfect compensation for not having a rocket launcher, as it not only fires powerful missiles, but at a high rate of fire like a machine gun, and boy does it feel satisfying to use. It's not short on ammo either, unlike say the Rhino 6 protosuit, as it has 100 maximum, which takes a while to drain. I also love the look of the missiles, starting out blue and turning red on impact. They're pretty much fireworks. I'll admit that the design of the weapon itself is kind of odd, as it sort of looks like a Nerf gun, but it does have a certain charm to it, and the multiple barrels makes it look super intimidating. What's that? How many barrels does the Rhino 2 have? Oh, that's right, it has 8. How fitting. And that was my ideal Ratchet Clank Quick Select. To recap, it consists of the Plasma Coil, Tesla Claw, Sheepinator, Groovatron, Scorpion Flail, Razor Claws, Buzz Blades, and Rhino 2. It was really tough to only choose 8 weapons, as the franchise contains hundreds, and most of them are good in some way. I left a lot of my favorites out, and some of the ones I included aren't even part of my top 8, but for variety's sake, I felt it had to be done. So, what's your ideal R&C Quick Select, and what did you think of mine? I'd be interested to know. That wraps up the 3rd week of Ratchet Clank Month. Next week we'll conclude the month with a video about my personal history with the Ratchet Clank franchise, so I hope you look forward to that. I'm Arcadon, and hopefully, you'll see me next week.